Now, ministers from 11 countries, including Britain and America, have agreed to give urgent military support to Syrian rebels seeking the overthrow of the Assad regime. Meeting in Qatar, the Friends of Syria group agreed to channel all necessary material and equipment the opposition needs via the Western-backed Supreme Military Council. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Jonathan Miller reports from Doha.
Tiny Qatar, power broker, international mediator, back centre stage today. Not the Taliban this time, but Syria. The Syrian opposition took over the old Assad embassy here 3 months ago. There was no rebel presence at this ministerial meeting. Their expectation, though, that today they'd be promised the weapons they need to turn the tide of the war. For 3 hours, while the world's press waited, 11 foreign ministers hammered out a communiqué which basically did just that. When they emerged, consensus that while they supported political settlement, all necessary materiel and equipment would be provided to counter what they called the brutal attacks by the regime and its allies. A fight back.
Every country committed today to step up what it is doing in direct response to what has happened on the ground. And also what is different is that this is now in response to what Iran and Hezbollah are doing.
What's emerged from this meeting then is agreement to urgently change the balance of power on the ground, currently in the regime's favour, in order to force Bashar al-Assad to the negotiating table. But having been beating the drum and cajoling other Western countries to arm Syria's rebels, Britain now finds itself with its hands tied, unable to intervene militarily without parliamentary approval and facing strong public opposition.
Every country has its different ways of assisting, as I say, and we haven't taken any decision about any lethal support ourselves. We are doing a great deal else, and that is greatly appreciated by the people of Syria, I think, whether in terms of equipment that saves lives, like body armor, like electricity generators, water purification kits. These are the sorts of things the United Kingdom is currently providing.
So while the Syrian rebels wait for British water purification kits, two jihadi groups are known to have already acquired advanced wire-guided Russian-made anti-tank missiles. Now the more secular Free Syrian Army says it's also received what its chief of staff calls game-changing weapons, thought to include shoulder-launched ground-to-air missiles. They're understood to have been provided by Sunni Muslim powers in this region, deeply disturbed by al-Assad's internationalization of this sectarian conflict. Rebel forces in Aleppo are bracing for an imminent regime offensive, backed by Hezbollah with Iranian Revolutionary Guards as military advisors. It's predicted that by the end of this year, there'll be 3.5 million Syrian refugees in neighbouring countries. Foreign ministers today expressed deep concern over this deteriorating humanitarian situation and called for urgent action to alleviate the suffering of the Syrian people. So a real sense of urgency has now been injected into efforts to resolve this Syrian crisis, and it's hardly surprising given that more than 90,000 Syrians have already been killed there. Today, Qatar's Prime Minister, who's been hosting these talks, talked of this as being an historic juncture and said that providing arms to the rebels may actually be the only way, in his view, of achieving peace. But as you saw in that report, there are several of these countries who are out of kilter in how they're going to approach this. Among them, of course, Britain. Now, as to the communiqué, apart from actually saying that these arms would be channeled through the Western-backed Free Syrian Army Command, it didn't actually go into any detail as to what weapons would be provided, or indeed did this communiqué address some of these really deep-seated issues, such as how do you stop these guns ending up in the hands of al-Qaeda affiliates? That said, some of these al-Qaeda affiliates seem to be very well armed indeed already.
Well, Jonathan, with the Americans in Qatar, what's going on with Afghanistan and these supposed talks with the Taliban office there?
And it is incredible that, this little tiny emirate of Qatar has become the focus of these two big issues, really. As to the Taliban, yes, John Kerry did talk about it today, the spat and the standoff that's resulted from the fallout of this opening of a Taliban embassy, if you like. Now, he did confirm tonight that his point man for Afghanistan and Pakistan, Ambassador James Dobbins of the State Department, is now here in Qatar. So technically, the talks with the Taliban could start at any time. But John Kerry said, we need to know whether we can get things back on track. And he added he didn't know whether that was going to be possible. That's up to the Taliban, he said. And we haven't heard a peep out of Mullah Omar's emissaries since Tuesday, since the plaque, since the flag went up. And as far as I'm aware, John Kerry is travelling from Qatar to Kabul tomorrow to try to calm nerves with President Hamid Karzai.
Thanks, Jonathan.